Lately, I have noticed something about myself. The way I see the world has changed. At first, I was not even sure what was happening. I would look at something simple, a truck, a company, a person, or even a random comment someone made, and my thoughts would not stop where they used to. One thought led to another, then another. In the past, I made decisions quickly. Possible, impossible. Relevant to me, not relevant to me. I rarely questioned those judgments. But now, when something looks impossible, I hesitate before closing the door, and one question comes to mind. Wait, what would have to happen first? I am not saying everything is possible, and I am not saying I can make everything happen. The question itself has simply changed. For a while, even I did not understand why I had started thinking this way. I wondered if I was overthinking everything. But looking back, I think this change began when I started seeing something I had somehow missed for years. By then, I had already spent nearly 20 years working in logistics, warehouses, inventory, shipping, trucks. I thought I understood how products moved, and in many ways, I did. But there was something behind all that movement that I had never really seen, the scale of the world on the other side. And strangely enough, I started seeing it at a hot dog company. I worked there as a logistics team leader, and every day, I saw the numbers up close. 110,000 hot dogs a day. About 2,200,000 a month. Even after nearly 20 years in logistics, that number made me stop. 110,000 every day. And I remember thinking, who eats all of this? Because nothing in my own life could explain that kind of demand. My family did not eat hot dogs every day. My friends did not. The people around me did not. If I had judged the market only by what I personally saw, the number would have made no sense. But I was standing inside the logistics operation. I saw the products moving. Orders kept coming in. Trucks kept being loaded. Products kept leaving, day after day. And even while the company was already producing that much, other companies were still asking for more. More. Not less. That was what stayed with me. Somewhere, in cities I had never visited, in stores I had never walked into, people were buying those products. Every product was going somewhere. Someone was buying it. Someone was eating it. The demand was real. I simply could not see the people creating that demand. And that was when I began to understand something. My own experience was not the size of the world. For nearly 20 years, I had watched products move through logistics. But at that hot dog company, I started thinking seriously about what existed on the other side of those shipments. For the first time, I began to see beyond logistics itself. I began to see the scale of the world behind it. After that, something in the way I processed information began to change. One piece of information stopped ending with itself. My wife once mentioned, almost in passing, that someone she knows handles vehicle dispatch related to the U.S. military. In the past, I probably would have thought, oh, I know a transportation company, maybe I could connect them, and that would have been the end of it. But this time, the thought kept going. How many trucks move every day? Are the routes fixed, or does every job go somewhere different? How much is paid for each trip? Who receives that money first? How many companies are involved before the job reaches the actual driver? And then another question appeared. When the truck reaches its destination, does it come back empty? An empty truck traveling hundreds of kilometers back means wasted time and money. Could it pick up another load nearby? Could another company need that exact return route? Without knowing this truck exists, I had no intention of entering that business. Nobody asked me to analyze it. I had simply heard one piece of information. But now, one piece of information no longer ended with one piece of information. A truck was no longer just a truck. It became one visible part of a much larger system behind it. Recently, I visited the Gyeongju National Museum. I saw countless artifacts from the ancient Silla kingdom, and the same thing happened again. In the past, I might have looked at an artifact and thought, beautiful, old, important, and then moved on. But this time, the questions kept coming. Who made this? Why was it made? How was it used? How was it discovered? How did they make it with the tools and materials available at that time? Why was it found in that particular place? And what does that location tell us? What changed if we compare it with something made 100 years earlier, or 100 years later? Suddenly, one artifact was no longer just one artifact, it became a starting point. Maybe I noticed this more strongly because of my own family's historical collection. My father has spent more than 20 years gathering artifacts and historical materials. In the past, I often saw them simply as objects. Now, each object feels like the beginning of a story. A military machine is not just a machine. It may contain the story of a soldier's job, a unit, a war, a moment in history. A pair of brass cups is not just metal. There may be names engraved on them. People, relationships, memories. One object can create 10 questions, and 10 questions can become 10 completely different stories. Then one day, I had a strange thought. My family is involved with a small historical collection. It is a place my father has built, one object at a time, for more than 20 years. And suddenly, I had this thought. If the right conditions existed, could someone like Donald Trump actually end up visiting a place like ours? Even I thought the idea sounded ridiculous. This is not a national museum, it is a small historical collection. The old version of me probably would have laughed. Why would someone like that ever come here? Impossible. End of thought. But this time, my thoughts did not stop there. I asked a different question. What would actually have to happen for something like that to become possible? There would need to be a real reason, a connection, the right timing, a meaningful purpose, security, and something both sides could gain. The point was not really Donald Trump. The point was that my thoughts no longer stopped at the word impossible. That was when I finally understood. The question itself had changed. In the past, I looked at something and quickly placed it into one of two categories. Possible or impossible. Yes or no. Now, I look at the space between them. What would have to happen first? Who would need to connect with whom? What would each side gain? What conditions are missing right now? This does not mean everything is achievable. Some things really are impossible. Some conditions may never exist. But I stopped confusing not possible right now with impossible forever. Those are not the same thing. The world itself did not suddenly change. The question I asked the world did. That is why the world no longer feels small to me. Behind one truck, there is a logistics system. Behind one product, there may be hundreds of thousands of consumers. Behind one person, there are relationship, experience, and a world I cannot see. Behind one company, there are suppliers, customers, and more companies. Behind one event, there are causes, interests, and conditions. Now, when I look at one thing, I start seeing what is behind it, and then what is behind that. The world did not suddenly become bigger. It was always this big. I was simply measuring it with the small circle of my own experience, and I had mistaken that circle for the whole world. Sometimes, the person I used to be feels unfamiliar to me. For a long time, I judged the world only by what I could personally see. If I had never seen something, I assumed it was rare. If nobody I knew was connected to it, I assumed it was far away from me. And if I could not see a path, I often assumed there was no path. For a while, this change in my thinking felt confusing. I wondered if I was overthinking everything. But now, I think something else was happening. My old way of measuring the world was no longer enough. I was beginning to see more. But I did not yet understand what I was seeing. Now I know this. Not knowing something that does not mean it does not exist. Not being connected to something today does not mean I never will be. And not being able to see a path right now does not mean there is no path. Maybe I simply have not reached the point where I can see it yet. In the end, what I started seeing was conditions. This is not blind optimism. I do not believe everything is possible, and I do not believe positive thinking alone can make things happen. For something to actually happen, real conditions have to exist. Connections, interests, timing, need, trust, a reason, and something both sides can gain. When those conditions align, two worlds that seem completely unrelated can suddenly become connected. And when those conditions do not align, even people standing close to each other may never truly connect. So now, when something looks impossible, I try not to close the door too quickly. I pause. What has to happen first? What conditions are missing, and which of those conditions can actually be changed? But then, there is another question. Among all those conditions, and all the steps that could be taken. Where should I begin? Which step could make the next step possible? Which action could actually start moving the whole process forward? Because not every condition has to be changed at once. Sometimes, one connection, one decision, or one small step can create the condition for the next one. Maybe that is the biggest difference between the way I used to see the world and the way I see it now. I no longer look only at what is possible today. I look at the conditions, the sequence, and the point where movement can begin. I look at what may decide, what becomes possible tomorrow.